Okay, everyone, it's I got 3:11 on the old clock. Let's go ahead and continue. Scott Rayder, thank you so much for joining us today. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this is the first time, and maybe not the first time, maybe the second time that Scott's been able to participate in a GCOOS board meeting, all members meeting. Scott's currently the executive director of the Alabama Water Institute. He's worked at UCAR, senior advisor to the president of UCAR. He's been in and around government and funding agencies and for forever. He was also the first chief of staff at NOAA for Vice Admiral Lautenbacher, 2001 to 2008, which is when I believe I first met Scott at an event. Maybe it was the crazy open house we had at Fleet and Miracle in Monterey.
Well, you got a good memory.
Yeah. You know, when you're a Navy captain and you have a retired three-star attending one of your events, and you know he's got his EA with him, you kind of tend to remember that stuff. But anyway, Scott, I appreciate you being here, and go for it. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that very nice introduction, and I want to thank everybody here for attending. I thought the first thing I really wanted to talk about kind of the biggest development in the Alabama Water Institute, but let me begin just by taking this slide up front. I'm the executive director of the Alabama Water Institute. And so recently we were awarded the Cooperative Institute for Research and Operations in Hydrology, which is pronounced CIROH. And obviously that's a NOAA Cooperative Institute, hence the three symbols that you see on this page. And I bring that to your attention because there's actually some other programs that are going to kind of form this, I call it the hydrologic triangle, okay? And so one of the things that is right across the road from my facility here in Tuscaloosa, the USGS is building the new hydrologic instrumentation facility. We're really excited about that. That's going to do the R&D behind the instruments that are going to go to support the refurbishment and revitalization of USGS's next generation water observing system. And then we also have a third program that was funded in FY22 in the Department of Defense. It's called the Global Water Security Center. So if you think of a three-legged stool, we've got this DoD money, the NOAA money, and the USGS money. And so they're arriving at the same time, and I was telling folks, right, we've been very busy on proposals for all of them to try and drive the capability here. So why don't we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is just an overview of who the partners are inside the consortium. It's been a lot of fun to put this together. You'll notice that it has very large geographic distribution. The other thing that I'm very proud about in terms of this Cooperative Institute is this is the first Cooperative Institute that is in the National Weather Service. So when Louis Uccellini was the head of the Weather Service, I had a long discussion with him about R2O and how NOAA struggled with R2O. Let's try a new model. Let's at least give it a shot. So he agreed, and my hat's off to him. He could have said, nope, don't want to do it. But the money and I'll say the focus is going to be on hydrology, and it's about moving that research across. When you look at this list, you will see, hopefully in the lower right-hand corner, GCOOS is a member. It's the only ocean observing system member. The other thing that I'm very proud about this group is that we have some historical Black colleges and universities. We have some minority serving institutions. NOAA put a very big emphasis on ensuring that we support some of their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I will tell you that is something we're going to try and do, and turning out people in STEM fields from underrepresented populations is something we're going to focus on. We have a plan to do this, and I'm excited about that. We have Hawaii. We have a lot of schools in the West too, because we're going to try and look at how to address certain issues in the region. We're supporting the National Water Center. It is not the Alabama Water Center. It's not the Southeast Water Center. So let me be really clear about that. The other thing is, if you look at this on the left-hand side, you wouldn't know this if I didn't tell you, those schools on the left are what are called members under the Cooperative Institute Agreement, and the ones on the right are partners. And this team approach is really critical because it's going to bring a lot of diverse approaches and expertise, and we want to build a national community of practice. And that's the thing that I'm excited about. Yeah. So let's go to the next slide. That's perfect, actually. Thank you. So this represents all the different hydroclimate zones that are out there. Obviously, that's important to hydrologists. And so you can see what that layout looks. A lot of people have asked about Saskatchewan. For those of you who don't know, Canada funded something called the Global Water Futures Program to the tune of about $200 million 5 years ago. They put a global hydrologic model into the cloud already. John Pomeroy, Ellen Pedolino up there, and Martin Clark are some of the best modelers in the world in this space. And so I say that's the kind of the outlier, because people say, Canada, yes, Canada. And we've talked to people at Environment Canada. We're pretty excited about this. The other thing, by the way, that's pretty interesting about this Cooperative Institute is we do have some private companies, and we're actually trying to look at vendors in that space. The two most notable are Jupiter Intel. You see them in Colorado, but they actually have offices in Palo Alto and in Wall Street. And then the other one is Barron's Meteorological Services, which is right up the road from Sarah Graves in Huntsville. I know this from my time at UCAR. Barron's did an interesting thing. They took the first generation of the water model and they sell it internationally. Okay? So we want to get that exposure. And by the way, these are also additional opportunities for our faculties to do research with these private sector organizations. We also see it as a pathway for our students. Next one, please. Next slide, please. So I would never have put this slide up when I started my career, okay, in 1992 at NOAA. So let me preface this slide with that. But really, our vision is this actionable water intelligence. Okay, this is where we're going. It sounds simple. I'm a big fan of Khan Academy, right? They said their vision is a world-class mathematics education for anyone, anywhere, anytime. Okay, we want actionable water intelligence at everyone's fingertips, and I would say anywhere, anytime in the United States. I have to caveat it there. But if anybody wants to pick up the methodology and go global, have at it. Let's go to the next slide. So, thank you. So this is kind of that overarching slide of what we're looking at. In plain terms, we've got to bring some depth and diversity to water prediction. That's mission number one. We need to improve forecasts of floods, droughts, water quality. We know this is something that's a challenge. It's coming with climate change. How do we address that in that context? It's something that we're going to look at. We really are trying to align in support of NOAA research. That's a big deal to us, but also the operations, okay? So the money in this sits inside the operational weather prediction capability, which is Tom Graziano's group, and we're excited about this because we're now having very good interaction. Central focus about enhancing really the performance of the next generation water model. Let me just say quickly, generation one of that water model was developed at UCAR and NCAR. It was a warp hydro model. Fred Ogden, who's outstanding, supporting the NWC. The second version is his model. Then the third model is we're going to iterate on what Fred has produced and do the third generation water model in the cloud. Okay? And I say that because it's going to be difficult. The Canadians have done it. We haven't done it in this country. And then I know in the atmospheric community, NCAR hasn't done it. So that's an issue. And a lot of ocean models are not as collaborative or community-based as they could be. So we're trying to get into that space and prove it can be done. And it hopefully can be an easier way, again, to bridge that research to operations transit. With that, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so you see the academia, government, and industry. I admit that this is kind of lifted from the weather community. AMS always talks about the three-legged stool of the weather enterprise in America, but it's really no different from water. And I would actually argue water is the constituent fluid that ties us together. So I would like to tell people that we could get rid of the terms oceans and atmosphere. I know that would be tough, but we have to think about that. And I have to do a quick disclaimer here. I don't know how many on this phone call know Ned Ostenso. Ned was the head of NOAA research when I started at NOAA in 1992. And he took me aside at a meeting in 1993 and says, remember, Rayder, water is going to be the key issue going forward as it pertains to climate. And Ned said, remember, it's one liquid, two densities. I've always picked up that line from him and tried to think of that in that Earth system science context. So when you look at this, really, we want to integrate the science, the data science, the hydrologic forecasting, and put it together. And while we might create something on the academic side, if it has application on the government side or on the industry side, we want to make sure it moves. So conceptually, this is where we're going. I can tell you that when we had this conversation with folks at the National Water Center, they really like this. They know that they're going to get certain parts of the mission, but they also know they can't do it all by themselves. And I will say that Ed Clark and his team over there have been super receptive to this type of approach. Next slide, please. And I'm going to go a little bit faster here so we get to questions. I'm sorry. So the goals obviously are supporting the water center, advancing research, and mobilizing the community. One of the things I will say that's been interesting in the hydrologic community is that there's no UCAR and there's no ocean leadership for hydrology. The organization that does that is called CIROH, which is the Cooperative University for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences. We are working with CIROH and the head of it, Jared Bales, to build some capacity in the hydrologic community. I will admit that part of my concern is I don't want other communities impinging on the hydrologic mission. We want to own as much of that as we can. And I will say that we are excited because now I think we can be, I'll say, the interstitial fiber between some of these communities. You can't do coastal resilience without understanding inundation, and that's a climate atmospheric issue, but that's an ocean issue too. So we want to kind of be the nexus between these different communities. The other thing is, right, these are a lot of different levels of stakeholders, and that's something that we're really coming to work with. You know, when we look at hydrologic forecasting, research, education, and communities of practice, they've got to be laid out in different ways to meet their respective communities. That's something we're going to try and do through here. Steve Burian, who's the PI, actually is meeting with the Water Center right now on some of that's how do we shape that and frame it, because we want to get it right at the beginning. All right, next slide. Sorry about that. Thank you, Jennifer. So these are the objectives, which is complementing it right there. There are 5 guiding objectives, right? So obviously we want to broaden and amplify those benefits in terms of the next generation water model. You've heard me say that, but it's a big deal. And one of the ideas here too is look at these hydrologic drivers. This is a big issue for us, so that we're going to think on the seasonal to sub-seasonal, but we're also going to think within the next 24 hours out to a week. So that's kind of the temporal spatial resolution, what we're looking at. This idea of being the thought leader and building community participation, I will say that's been interesting. We just hosted the American Water Resources Association meeting. I didn't realize how dispersed and fragmented that community is, but the good thing is the Cooperative Institute is going to present us a rallying factor or something to build around, so I'm excited about that. We do want to accelerate these researches in data acquisition, remote sensing, hydroinformatics, and if there's one term that cuts across this entire theme, it's how do you apply an Internet of Things approach to water resources? It's the concept. It's the concept of doing it in a different way, and this is something that we are open to kind of creative ways to get at this. Obviously, 4 you see there, the synthesis and communication to do co-produce water intelligence. We've heard the term environmental intelligence. We want to produce water intelligence. You will notice in this bullet we talk about improving decisions and guiding policy. Okay, and that's something that when we look at coastal areas in the future and sea level rise, we're going to try and figure out how to get out there and say, this is what the state of the science says, and based on this, here's some policies we might want to consider. We want to be careful. We do not want to get into any furballs with anybody, but we're going to say, this is what the science is telling us. And then that last one, which is, again, promoting inclusive education and outreach. We really have to do more to bring folks into the disciplines and look a little bit more like the country than we currently are. I will tell you that's going to take some time, but I do think on our team, again, with HBCUs and MSIs, we're excited about going there. Let me go to the next slide, and I'm actually going to stop. I have slides after this, but I think I had half an hour, and I want to get some time for questions. So these are the 4 big themes that you will see: water prediction, community water model, that's development, hydroinformatics, and decision support. I will say that right now, these are the 4 themes that every proposal we put forward to NOAA, we're kind of behind. And so far it's going well. Just so you know, award came in early April. All of our proposals are due into NOAA by May 20th, since folks here work with NOAA, and they're telling us they're going to turn these by June, and we're going to see funding begin to flow in July or August. I certainly hope that's the case. And I will say at a high level, we're submitting 2 years of proposals. There's going to be $17.5 million the first year and $17.5 million in the second year. That money comes from $15 million in the FY21 enacted, and then 20 in FY22. So we're feeling pretty good, but I'm going to finish with this. I don't want to go to the other slides, and we'll go to Q&A. Remember, in the CI, you get a bucket. It's like an IDIQ contract, and we've got to fill that bucket. And so what we're explaining to members is it's a jump ball. You can go there and do that. So for the GCOOS personnel in particular, and I think, Carl, you're well aware of this, one of the really novel things about these CIs is you can pass money through them. So if there is a disaster supplemental or some other type of activity, NOAA has informed us that not in FY22, but in FY23, they want to move some of the IIJA money through our Cooperative Institute. I want to call that to your attention. That's something that we're going to work with them on how to do it. We have yet to do it. We have to focus on our first core proposals. But that's something down the road I'm really excited about. Given GCOOS's support and rolling things like tropical cyclone forecasts and on track and intensity, where we can bring a capability, if we get money added, Congress says, hey, we need $1.5 million study, that can come through this Cooperative Institute. So I wanted to make sure folks were aware of that. So I apologize. I made too many slides and I'm trying to spit out too much. Let me stop there and I'll take any questions that anybody has. And if I can't answer my promises, I'll get back to you.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. A lot going on in your world down there. My personal experience when I was at the University of Southern Mississippi following Katrina, you may remember that we were working on developing a decision tool whereby the general public could actually visualize what the effects of an inundation or a storm surge event might look like and how it might affect them. It never got funded by Weather Service or the Hurricane Center or anyone else. But the problem we saw time and time again was that people don't understand what the message is trying to tell them. So it's a huge challenge, especially on a coast where you have a large trilingual population with the Hispanics, Vietnamese. It's really a challenge to get that information in a form and on a platform that people actually have access to in order to get the message out. It's a huge challenge, and I hope you were able to meet it.
Yeah, let me address that, Joe, because I actually remember when you showed us that inundation. We were down visiting Stennis. We have got to make bigger social science investment in risk communication. And it's really hard, and I've been guilty of this, right? I hold up, I'm guilty, both hands. Sometimes, yeah, we'll get to that later. And it's getting to the point where we really need to think about that and incorporate it at the beginning of the research effort. One of the things we want to do is look at the demographics. I have been told, right, the demographics of the largest number of people killed in flash floods in Alabama is white males between the ages of 18 and 22 in 4x4 vehicles. I got to verify that. Part of it wants to believe it, but until I see the actual data. But the concept there is how you communicate to those folks today, and they take the information and see the risk and change their behavior. We need more research on that. And it's going to be, and the problem that I see is that we got to fund the physical stuff. I get it, but if we get the science right, operationalize that forecast, if we can't communicate the risk in a way that people take action to protect their lives, we've failed. You got to have all three steps. So I'm with you, and I don't know how as a community we can explain this to people, because I talk about it. We're trying to put money on it through a proposal. I can tell you that. I don't know how much is going to get funded. Anything else?
Oh my goodness.
So there's a question from Josie in the chat. Do you see it?
Oh, hang on. Oh, it's blinking.
Yeah, go ahead, Josie.
Where is it? Josie,
Scott.
I can't.
All right.
Okay, I just unmuted.
Wow,
I guess I can.
Okay.
I was just wondering, I think the water model is really exciting. And I was wondering from your perspective, what you saw as the most pressing coastal data gaps needed to, support that model, particularly as you interface the land-sea interface, which seems to be the big focus and need.
So I can tell you, we've been talking to Noah about this. It's the oceanographic data in the column. The other thing is good maps. So I think folks here know what Atlas 14 is. There's a big issue right now to push an Atlas 14 proposal through the Cooperative Institute. Carl, I'm going to use this number because this is what the Weather Service told us. They're telling us that in the IIJA, there's $492 million for NOAA, of which some of that money is going to look at flood inundation and coastal inundation mapping. New maps at high resolution would really improve a lot of that as well. But more observations never hurts. I don't know of any scientist who ever says, hey, we want fewer. I think the hardest part is in every funding stream that I see in terms of a gap, I'm going to put this a different way, Josie. Long-term continuous observations are the most important thing we need, yet they're the hardest to fund.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really difficult. And we've got in Alabama, I fund 4 stream gauges in Alabama that the Sipsey River, 3 of them over there, and one's on the Tombigbee. They're over 85 years in record. But I'm paying for them. Now, USGS, I didn't realize this till I took this job. USGS makes universities pay to maintain these gauges. It's a pretty good deal. So I've talked with Don Klein about this. That model's not going to be sustainable. So we have to flip it. And this is where I'd like a group like COASI, right? The IUS model is better. They pay you for observations. You run the observing system and the data goes back. The notion that the University of Alabama is paying USGS for this long-term, but I'm not going to give up that long-term continuous record. So I'm kind of caught over a funding barrel. So that's the biggest gap that I see. And how do we explain to public officials who think that you get all this data from space? There's a great number of people who think we can collect all this stuff in our oceans and coasts, and it's the satellite's going to take these perfect measurements, and we don't need the in situ measurements. We've got to make that case. I think I'm not going to speak for Carl or NOS here, but I think one of the hardest debates is you can buy a lot of ocean observing for one satellite. Just one. Josie, did that answer your question? Oh, Nick, go ahead.
Yes, thanks.
Me?
Sure, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah. Just to give you a heads up, next week, has the tropical cyclone meeting in New Orleans. So that covers a wide range of topics: intensity track, inundation, storm surge, operations, all that good stuff. So it's at the Marriott in New Orleans. If you have a chance, stop by.
And I'm going to, Nick, I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at everybody here. I mean, I was actually, some people will laugh at this. I was part of the Airlie House crew when we started with IUS back in the late 90s. Back then, I'm going to say this, gliders and certain techniques to do ocean observing had not come of age. The technologies are moving so fast. We really have got to think about how do we incorporate them in and change things. I wouldn't call it the National Data Buoy Center. I think Bill Burnett, he's got to change his name. Okay, it's not just about buoys anymore. We've got to look at, I think we should revisit the Airlie House meetings and re-architect what we need. I really do. And I will just say this in terms of moving forward, there's now a private sector in oceanographic data that didn't exist. What are lessons that the ocean observing community can take from the weather community? We've got a national mesonet program. I mean, I had to start it when I was at NOAA, right, that came out of a thing called UrbanNet, right? We monitored the 16 largest cities in the United States after 9/11 to see which way the wind was blowing. So if something bad happened, we could tell people where not to go. NESDIS buys data. The National Ocean Service buys data under the auspices of the Hydrographic Services Act. What would a data buy look like in the world of oceans and coasts? I'm not saying I'm for it or against it, but I think it's coming and we need to give it some thought. What do best data practices look like for data buys? I think this is really difficult. I know that I worked on GPS radio occultation in my previous life. The Air Force did a data buy, NOAA did a data buy, and NASA did a data buy. The 3 program managers never talked to each other and they bought duplicative data. We've got to stretch every dollar. And so I would encourage you to think about what that looks like in the future and how we're going to build that. I'm going to say, I call it the weather enterprise, but this kind of observing enterprise between public, private, and academics. How do we build it and maintain it? And I think, by the way, it could get much more difficult after this November.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Howden.
Yeah. I was wondering, you had put up, this academia, government, and industry. I was wondering about like non-governmental organizations like the First Street Foundation.
I know
And
those guys.
yeah, and I know that they're working a lot with economists, and
Yep.
another role for economists is they can take the environmental data and other social science data and look at how people change their behavior based on what's happening, and can inform the policymakers. And I was wondering, what do you see in your center for the role of that type of economic research?
So I'm going to tell you, we want to get there, right? If you look at, I'm going to take you back 20 years. I apologize, but I have to do this. In 2002, we put forward inside NOAA a book, and some of you might remember, it was Economic Statistics for NOAA. The one that really stood out was, and folks might remember, Rodney Weir was our chief economist at the time, right? The largest GDP producing states are coastal, right? When we look at economic performance and how America competes globally on the global stage, it's the coast, by and large, okay? Maybe Denver's an island, places like Chicago, Minnesota, okay? But really, you got to look at that in context. And so that gets to that social science piece about how we build that. And let me just say on First Street, I'm on the board, I guess I can say this now and not get in trouble. One of the things we were trying to do with First Street, our strategy as the board when we put this thing together was, how do you get people to understand climate risk? It actually comes back to that social science piece. And right, people's biggest investment in their life is their house. Okay. At our meeting that we had last Friday, I can't tell you who the board member was. One of the board members is Jay Fassan, by the way. He's a billionaire from North Carolina. I am not. But they don't understand why people are moving to Florida right now. They're very concerned. And right now, Florida is the fastest growing state. And they're like, but the south end of Florida, the long-term prognosis is not good. So First Street was founded on the idea, the premise that if we could explain people climate risk against their most valued possession, which is their house, they're going to start thinking differently about climate. And what I can tell you is we're going to announce Fire Factor. That's going to be the next big tool, right? So for those of you who are not familiar, you can go to the Flood Factor website. You put in your address of your home, condominium, wherever you live, and it gives you a risk score, right? And I will tell you that, and see, I'm looking at you. The first time we put it out, man, the number of lawyers that called us from realtors was unbelievable, right? Because nobody wants that out there. We've got to be transparent, and we're transparent when you do your homeowner's inspection, but why aren't we transparent when you do your environmental inspection as it pertains to weather and climate conditions around the property you're buying? So we think we're in pretty good shape, and I would say relative to what we do with First Street, and I'm not speaking as a guy on the board there, but now we've got companies coming into this domain looking at this risk impact. And if you look at it, I mean, I know Jupiter's doing a lot of work in the coast, Jupiter Intel. All these companies, again, there's a market for this data. And I really think and GCOOS needs to be privy to those conversations about, hey, we can help you build resilience at the coast in a smarter way at a lower dollar. I think that case can be made. And by the way, I always, I think folks know who Willie Sutton was, right? He was Willie, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. When I look at insurers and reinsurers in the coast, right, they're looking at long-term climate risk right now, making decisions for the next 20, 40 years. And it's going to be very interesting if we had this call in 10 years, what their risk posture is going to be. And that's something, by the way, that I get First Street and others a lot in this domain, they're paying a lot of attention to. I still have a house in Boulder. 2 fires have passed within a mile from my house. I'm paying I pay a lot more attention. Sure, yes, sir.
So with you're talking about insurance and inundation, FEMA 2.0 just came out, and I personally am impacted by it because I live in Louisiana, coastal Louisiana, and I'm looking at about an 18% increase every year for the next 5 at least 5 years, probably, something like that. Yeah, I guess it's not so much a question as a response to what you were saying earlier about, everybody moving to the coastal environment. It seems like that might be a policy effort to try to discourage that.
So,
Or is it more just a financial thing to make the program solvent?
well, let me say something in that space just from personal experience, which is I was flooded out of my house in Colorado in 2013. If you had told me there was going to be a flash flood that was going to affect my house in Colorado, I looked at Hogan, you got to get your head examined. Okay, I'm like, what? Those storms hit so fast. My house was not flooded out because water came in windows. The water table rose so rapidly because the ground was saturated. I walked into my basement, I had 4 feet of water. Okay, so that people didn't understand that. They were like, the water's not coming in my windows, but there's water in my basement. Yeah, there's this thing called the water table, moves up and down. So to your point on these policies, there's got to be ways too that we transition people out of risk or explain to them what the risk is. I know that California is looking at this. I've talked to some former researchers at NCAR that I stay in touch with. California is looking at this, okay? And we've got to, it can't be a cold turkey switch, but they've got to find ways to transition and do that. I think it's coming. What's the true cost of living someplace? It's my issue with electric vehicles. I love electric vehicles, but no one will ever show me the life cycle cost of an electric vehicle, because if you can't dispose of the battery, it's going to be around forever. How do you price that? So we've got to start thinking about this, but this gets to the economic arguments. And I also think there's cultural issues. I used to go down to Grand Isle a lot when I was at NOAA, and I don't know if David Carmodel is still the mayor down there, but there's a cultural reason why they're there. For those on the call, I didn't realize a lot of people were moved from Canada down to southern Louisiana. That was a shocker to me. I was like, wow. And it was after the War of 1812. And the British just said, we're not going to deal with these French up here. They're not going to revolt. We're going to ship them down to Louisiana. Well, they became the underlying of the Cajun culture. And we've got to figure out how to address these things. But I think the interesting I see there is the insurance companies now are paying a lot more attention to these issues than they ever have. And I don't know how many of you know Verisk International. I would encourage you. Verisk International is a company that I follow. I do not invest in them, but Verisk, they do all the analytics for the reinsurance industry in the United States, right? The big European reinsurers, it's kind of their analytics firm. They bought Atmospheric Environmental Research back in 2010 or 2011. I don't know if folks know AER, really good outfit out of Massachusetts. I've always thought in my mind, could I create the wet AER? What does the ocean environmental research group look like? And what they do is they do AER does risk posture in the atmosphere, but they're not really doing it in the coast. And I think Jupiter might try and fill some of that void. There's some other companies like Descartes out of New Mexico, if you haven't looked up Descartes. And then there's just novel products that I've talked to the fish rules guy down here in Rich Blaylock in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm trying to convince him that fish rules or fish brains is the new application. Can they help educate people about climate? I'm not asking them to come up with a slogan for or against, but just so people understand how it impacts things here. Anything else? And Joe, if I'm over, I apologize. Wait, you're muted. I can't hear you.
There we go. Thanks, Scott. Really an interesting topic, and sort of one that's not been on everybody's radar over, for years. But certainly it's getting there now, and there's so many implications, both climatological, economic, so on and so forth. It's incredible. You've got a big task out ahead of you, but I'm sure you'll be able to handle it all really well. Thanks so much for being here today. And I look forward to our continued relationship with the CI as we move forward. And don't be a stranger.
No, and just to the team, all good ideas are welcome, and we can put anything on the table at any time. And if you've got a program manager inside NOAA that has an interest, talk to that program manager and they can move money through. That's how it works. So, Joe, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the GCOOS team, and you will definitely be hearing from us. Let me get to May 20th.
Okay, Scott, thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care.